Alien Soldier does not shake your hand first. It throws you into a fight and expects you to learn fast. Treasure builds it less like a normal run and gun and more like a boss rush with short breathers in between. The controls have layers: weapon selection, fixed aiming, free movement, dashing, hovering, and even turning enemy shots into health. At first, it can feel like too much, but once it clicks, the game becomes incredibly sharp. The sprites are huge, the animation is wild, and the soundtrack keeps the pressure high. For Gunstar Heroes fans wanting something stranger, harder, and more technical, this still feels like a 16-bit showpiece. You know an import shooter has a reputation when people talk about it like a secret handshake. Eliminate Down does not reinvent the horizontal shmup, but it is built with real confidence. The stages are fast, busy, and surprisingly varied, often changing direction or throwing in hazards that demand memorization as much as reflex. Its 3-weapon system keeps the action readable, while the big mechanical bosses give the game that late-era Mega Drive spectacle collectors love. Original copies are expensive, and the difficulty can bite, but on an emulator or flashcart, the appeal is obvious. A tough, polished shooter that earns its reputation. This feels like the kind of cartridge you rented by accident, then kept thinking about all week. Ranger X looks like a straightforward mech shooter, but the way it plays is more unusual than that. You're managing flight, ground movement, a support bike, and several weapons, so the first few minutes can feel busy. Stay with it though, and the design starts to make sense. The stages have strong visual identity, the graphics push the Genesis hard, and the combat has a heavy mechanical feel that suits the setting. A 6-button pad helps a lot, and the difficulty can bite, but this remains one of the system's most impressive action sleepers. Boot it up expecting Sega's version of Zelda, and Crusader of Centy quickly shows it has its own heart. You get a bright overhead adventure, animal companions, sword-based puzzles, and a surprisingly thoughtful tone under the colorful surface. The ability to talk with animals, then lose the ability to understand humans, gives the story a strange emotional pull for a 16-bit action RPG. It's not especially punishing, and some bosses are easier than players might expect, but that also makes it approachable today. For anyone hunting Genesis adventures beyond Oasis and Landstalker, this is one of the warmest discoveries on the console. Pulseman has that late system spark where a developer seems determined to squeeze one more stylish idea out of the hardware. Made by Game Freak before Pokémon changed everything, it mixes fast platforming with electric charge mechanics that let you bounce, dash, and ricochet through stages. It has a little Sonic energy, a little Mega Man structure, but its identity is really in the movement. The graphics are colorful and stylish, with digital world effects that still look lively, and the music gives the game a bright, futuristic personality. It's not brutally hard, but the 3-hit setup keeps you alert. Platform fans should absolutely give it time. The first time Panorama Cotton starts flying forward, it is hard not to lean a little closer to the screen. Instead of a side-scrolling cute-em-up, this entry sends Cotton into a Space Harrier-style rail shooter full of candy-colored fantasy scenery, scaling tricks, and constant motion. The action can be chaotic, and the pseudo-3D movement is not as smooth as later hardware could manage, but the ambition is part of the fun. It feels playful, odd, and technically hungry. The music is pleasant rather than unforgettable, but the visuals carry a lot of personality. For Cotton fans and 16-bit tech showcase hunters, this is more than a rare cartridge trophy. Here's what happens when a boss fight, a stage play, and a toy box get turned into one loud platformer. Dynamite Headdy runs on puppet theater energy, with stage props, scene changes, oversized enemies, and a hero who attacks by throwing his own head. The gimmick is funny at first, but it also gives the game real variety, because different heads change how you move, fight, and survive. Visually, it's one of the loudest and most colorful Sega Genesis games, sometimes almost overwhelming in motion. The difficulty has sharp edges, especially later, but the creativity rarely slows down. For weird 16-bit platformers, this one still has teeth. Gley Lancer hooks you before takeoff by letting you decide how your option pods behave. That sounds like a small menu choice, but it changes the entire feel of the game. Instead of simply firing forward and surviving patterns, you're constantly thinking about angles, coverage, and where threats will appear next. The anime-style intro gives it personality, while the detailed sprites, parallax, and strong soundtrack help explain why it became such a cult import. It's not always as polished in level design as the absolute top-tier shooters, but the freedom to aim through your pods gives it a distinct flow that makes it easy to recommend. A lot of Genesis shooter fans remember this one with admiration and a few battle scars. Gaiares looks familiar at first, but the TOES satellite gives it a clever hook. You can send it out to copy enemy weapons, then power them up by stealing from the same enemy types again. That system makes experimentation exciting, especially because different weapons can change how you approach whole sections. The presentation has a strong, early Genesis sci-fi anime flavor, and the music gives the first stage an immediate kick. The catch is the difficulty. Long stages, harsh checkpoints, and heavy enemy fire punish mistakes hard. Patient shmup players will find real personality here. Beyond Oasis feels best when Prince Ali is right in the middle of the fight, throwing knife combos instead of politely poking at enemies. That extra punch makes it stand apart from many Zelda-style adventures of the era. Special weapons and elemental spirits add puzzle solving and variety, but the action is what keeps it moving. The world isn't enormous, and RPG purists may find it lighter on exploration than expected, but the pacing is strong. Ancient gives the game large sprites, clean animation, and a colorful Arabian fantasy feel, while Yuzo Koshiro's music adds atmosphere without overpowering the action. It remains one of the Genesis's easiest adventures to revisit. Most anime fighters from this era ask fans to forgive a lot, but Treasure came in with an actual idea. Yu Yu Hakusho Makyō Tōitsusen builds around 4-player battles, plane switching, team modes, and chaotic screen control instead of simply copying Street Fighter II. With friends and a multi-tap, it becomes a messy, energetic party fighter years before that concept became common. The sprites are smaller than some players may expect, and the presentation is not as lavish as Treasure's best action games, but the mechanics have a smart balance between offense, defense, and movement. Even without deep anime knowledge, it is fascinating as a 16-bit fighting experiment. This is the sort of cartridge you show someone just to say, look what they got running on a Genesis. Red Zone throws rotating backgrounds, vector-style effects, FMV-like compression, scaling, and technical flexing all over the screen, yet it is still more than a demo reel. The helicopter missions are tense overhead shooting, while the commando sections add variety and make the mission structure feel bigger than expected. It can be demanding, and some players may need time to adjust to its hybrid rhythm, but the attention to detail is impressive. If you enjoy seeing developers wrestle strange effects out of Sega hardware, this is a fascinating ride. On paper, the pitch sounds awesome. Smash mutants as Mazinger, then scale up for giant one-on-one boss fights. Mazin Saga is strongest during the regular beat-em-up sections. The controls respond well, the enemies require some pattern reading, and the robot theme gives the action a heavier feel than the usual street brawler. The trouble starts when the game shifts into fighting game mode. Those boss fights can feel stiff, cheap, and much less satisfying than the stages leading up to them. Even so, the big sprites and manga energy make it an interesting curiosity, especially for players who enjoy flawed but distinctive Genesis action games. Battlemania Daiginjō wastes no time proving the sequel knew exactly what to upgrade. The two heroines return with sharper controls, brighter presentation, more elaborate stages, and a stronger sense of anime comedy. The ability to choose firing styles, especially the 8-way option, gives the game a flexibility that many horizontal shooters lack. Bosses are big, expressive, and full of motion, while the soundtrack has the punchy FM energy fans hope for from a late Mega Drive shooter. The missing two-player mode is still a shame, considering the two-character concept, but as a solo import shmup, this is one of the console's most polished treasures. Go in expecting a regular shooter, and Sub-Terrania will probably humble you in the first cave. Your ship fights gravity, burns fuel, and must handle mission objectives that ask for more than simply blasting everything in sight. That is exactly what makes it memorable. The game plays closer to a tense piloting challenge, where conserving thrust and learning the caves matters as much as aiming. Zyrinx gives it an isolated, subterranean mood, helped by atmospheric music and some nice visual touches. The learning curve is steep, and trial and error is part of the package, so it's not for everyone. Mastering it, though, feels genuinely rewarding. In Alisia Dragoon, you are not swinging a sword or firing straight ahead. Alisia attacks automatically when powered up, letting you focus on movement, spacing, and keeping your companions alive. Those 4 companion creatures give the game extra texture because each one changes how you handle threats. It is an action platformer with a fantasy mood, some attractive parallax, and a soundtrack that gives the adventure a serious edge. The game isn't huge, and careful players can power up enough to survive, but it feels polished all the way through. The Ooze is weird in a way that only late Genesis experiments tend to be. You are not a ninja, soldier, or mascot animal. You are a living puddle crawling through toxic facilities, squeezing around hazards, spitting slime, and trying not to lose too much of your own body mass. The idea is genuinely original, and the animation sells the strange liquid movement well. At the same time, the slow pace, awkward combat, and rising difficulty can wear some players down. It feels like a concept that needed one more sequel to fully blossom. Still, anyone exploring Sega Technical Institute's stranger work should at least try it. Imagine Mercs reworked as a witch adventure, and you're close to the appeal here. Twinkle sends Saria through overhead run-and-gun stages filled with castles, forests, monsters, traps, and oversized bosses. The 3-weapon setup gives you spread, forward power, and homing coverage, so the rhythm is more about positioning than pure button mashing. It's energetic and charming, but also tougher than the cute presentation suggests. Some scenery and enemy colors can get messy, and the Japanese text may limit the story for many players. Even with those issues, it feels unlike almost anything else on the Mega Drive, which makes it a very appealing import.
It's easy to underestimate this one if you only watch a few seconds of footage. Game Ground has small sprites, a deliberate pace, and stages that look simple at first glance. But give it time, especially with 2 players, and the strategy starts to take over. Each warrior has a different weapon, speed, and range, so success comes from choosing the right character for the right enemy layout, rescuing teammates, and knowing when to escape instead of clearing the screen. Some reviewers found it frustrating, while many players grew attached to its strange tactical rhythm. It's not for everyone, but it remains one of Sega's most unusual conversions. After one good stage, the tank controls start making sense in a way that feels surprisingly modern. Granada lets you guide a futuristic tank across open maps, hunting targets, dodging fire, and using both standard shots and a locked direction cannon to attack from safer angles. What keeps it interesting is the variety. Each mission has a different layout or gimmick, from darkened areas to gate systems and heavy enemy formations, so it avoids feeling like the same arena repeated. The graphics are clean rather than spectacular, but the speed and control give it a satisfying edge. For Genesis shooter fans, this still feels crisp.
The whole thing looks like it crawled out of a mid-90s comic shop, all armored mercenaries, chunky weapons, industrial chaos, and enemies flooding the screen. Skeleton Crew plays like an overhead run-and-gun with independent aiming, and the controls are better than you might expect from a 3-button Sega setup. Core Design also knew how to make the hardware move, so the game has smooth animation, busy backgrounds, and plenty of visual effects. The downside is repetition. A lot of the action becomes hold, fire, and survive carnage, and the music does not match the aggression on screen. Still, in co-op, the simple mayhem works better. This feels like the cartridge you picked when you wanted swords, monsters, and no complicated explanation. Blades of Vengeance gives you 3 characters, each with a different feel, then pushes you through monster-filled stages with traps, shops, magic, and plenty of old-school punishment. It is not built on spectacular set pieces or deep combos, but the controls are responsive, the graphics are solid, and the fantasy atmosphere has that early 90s Electronic Arts flavor. The lack of passwords or continues can make long sessions stressful, especially near the end. Still, with a friend or a bit of patience, it's a sturdy hack and slash worth a look. Decap Attack is ridiculous in the best early 90s Sega way. Underneath the spooky cartoon skin, it comes from the same design family as Magical Hat and Psycho Fox, but the Western Halloween makeover gives it a personality all its own. Chuck D. Head attacks with the face in his chest, throws his skull when he finds it, and can use potions for temporary advantages. The platforming is simple, but the stages are long, full of secrets, and broken up by bonus areas and boss fights. Its biggest drawback is the lack of passwords or saves, which makes a full playthrough feel heavier today. The goofy horror theme still works. This is not trying to race Sonic. It would rather make you wander around holding the wrong item for 20 minutes. That's part of Cosmic Spacehead's charm. It blends point-and-click style puzzles with short platforming sections, giving it a very different flavor from the usual Genesis mascot game. The humor is odd, the world is bright, and the graphics have a Saturday morning sci-fi look that feels closer to a cartoon than a typical platformer. It can also be cryptic, because the pleasure is figuring out strange item interactions and remembering where everything belongs. The platforming is not the star, but the adventure structure has real charm.
Metapack collected. Metapack collected.
Zero tolerance feels like the Genesis trying to punch above its weight, and honestly, that's part of the appeal. It's a full first-person shooter on hardware that clearly wasn't built for Doom-style action. The viewing window is small, the frame rate is limited, and the environments are plain, but the game still has a real pull. You move through space station corridors, clearing every enemy, managing ammunition, and choosing from squad members with different stats. It's slower and rougher than PC shooters of the same era, but on Genesis it felt ambitious. The optional link cable support made it even more unusual.
No wild gimmick is hiding here. This is a straight vertical shooter and not much more. Verytex gives you a few weapon types, bombs, speed settings, shields, and patterns that become tougher as the stages move along. Some players will find it too plain compared to the Mega Drive's best shooters, and that criticism is fair, but there is still a certain rental weekend appeal to it. The action is easy to understand, the difficulty has teeth, and the soundtrack, with work from names later associated with much bigger RPG scores, gives the game more energy than its basic design might suggest. It is not essential, but it is playable. 27. Vixen 357, Sega Mega Drive. Move that Langrisser-style strategy itch into a military sci-fi mech setting, and you get the appeal of Vixen 357. Battles unfold on grid maps, but instead of recruiting fantasy soldiers, you manage pilots, vector mechs, ranged weapons, melee attacks, ammunition, and support abilities. The language barrier is real, especially for the story, but players have noted that the core tactics can be learned through experimentation. The presentation has some strong moments, particularly the mech art and dramatic intro music, even if some maps and battle backgrounds repeat. It is not quite top tier, but for Genesis strategy fans, it scratches a very specific itch. It looks harmless until your little dinosaur army starts doing exactly what you forgot to plan for. Dyna Brothers 2 has you guide units in real time, balancing offense, defense, movement, and reconnaissance, while the battlefield keeps evolving. The presentation is playful, but the design asks for micromanagement, patience, and an understanding of how your creatures behave without constant direct control. The Japanese text can be intimidating, though reviewers have noted that much of the gameplay can still be understood with practice. It may feel thin compared to full PC strategy games, but on Mega Drive, it's a very distinctive experiment. Rent a Hero treats superhero work less like Destiny and more like a weird part-time job. You play an ordinary young man who receives a powered suit by accident, then takes paid superhero jobs to keep the suit charged and the household bills moving. That structure gives the game a strange mix of action RPG, life sim, and Sega self-parody. The combat is simple, and the Japanese text is a major hurdle for players without a guide or translation, but the personality is the reason to try it. It feels playful in a way many 16-bit RPGs do not, turning hero work into errands, jokes, and small-town weirdness. After enough starships and metal corridors, a shooter built around Greek mythology feels like a nice change of scenery. In Phelios, you ride Pegasus as Apollo, cutting through monsters to rescue Artemis from Typhon. That theme does a lot of work, giving the game memorable bosses, dramatic intermission scenes, and a setting that stands apart from the usual space war. The shooting itself is fairly traditional, with charge shots and power-ups, and some reviewers felt the later stages did not match the freshness of the opening. Still, the controls are responsive, the difficulty curve is reasonable, and the mythological style gives it charm.